and welcome to Mondo Cinemuck, for fuck's sake. This episode is all about the fantasy cinema, the bloody fantasy cinema. I had the idea of making an episode about the fantasy cinema back in December. The idea being that I would put it together to coincide with the release of The Hobbit. So the thought was I could go and see The Hobbit and then build the episode around a sort of a review of that, purely so that I could ride the coattails of the her of a thing to a few views on this here bloody YouTube. I went to see The Hobbit. I'm still there waiting for the fucking thing to finish. So while I'm down there in the Holloway Road Odeon, praying for Enya to hurry up and bloody show up, I thought I may as well get on with things. I can't be sitting around waiting for that to happen. So I thought I'll put together this fantasy episode without The Hobbit, and that's fair enough, because to be honest, I can't be bothered with them hairy-footed hers.
Here, Sam, you for coming with us to this Mordor or what? Mordor, is it, you say? Mordor? I don't know about Mordor. I could certainly fucking Mordor a wank. You're a dirty wee cunt, Sam, aren't you? You dirty wee fucking whore.
So what I did was I went and got terribly pissed with Alex Sargent of King's College, London. Now Alex is an expert on fantasy cinema. I know next to fuck all about it. He knows all there is to know. So I went and had a chat with him, and I did a sort of introduction thing then, but I was so fucking banjaxed that it was unusable. So I'm talking to Alex Sargent. Who's a... So I'm talking to Alex Sargent. I'm in the pub with Alex Sargent. So I'm in the pub with Alex Sargent, who is an expert on. Anyway, what I asked Alex that night was, Alex Sargent, for Christ's sake, would you tell us once and for all what are the 5 best fantasy films of all time?
Well, Aaron, fantasy is a sprawling and complex genre, and it's perhaps ridiculous to distill that legacy down to 5 films. But I'll play along, because, you know, I've got nothing else to do and you just bought me a pint. Thanks for that, by the way. So at number 5 is Peter Pan. I'm, of course, as everybody knows, referring to the 1924 version of the film, directed by Herbert Brennan, and starring Betty Rosnan in the starring role as Peter himself. The film is theatrical in the sense that Méliès only approximated. It has a sophistication to its special effects, it has a sophistication to its storytelling that primitive cinema, such as Trip to the Moon or all that sort of stuff, only ever suggests that. It's a wonderful little film, and perhaps the best example of the Peter Pan Barry mythology that ever exists. Crucially, it never ignores the subplot of the film, which is essentially the film is about the sort of damned temporality of childhood. Although it does add an interesting aspect of it that makes it about American patriotism. But we'll ignore that and jump along to the glorious, fantastical nature of the film. At number 4, it's a cheat really, it's the Lord of the Rings trilogy. If you want to make me pick, I'll pick the Fellowship of the Ring. I must confess that this choice is made more out of a sense of duty to the genre than it is actual attachment to the source material itself. I'm not a Tolkien fan, I'm never going to be a Tolkien fan, but what Lord of the Rings did for fantasy is equivalent to what, say, Kubrick's 2001 did to the sci-fi genre, or what Friedkin's The Exorcist did to horror. It legitimised it. It made it mainstream. Prior to The Lord of the Rings, fantasy was seen as sort of the stuff of fanboys, the stuff of cine-fantastic, the stuff of adolescent children playing with Dungeons and Dragons in their living room. After The Lord of the Rings, fantasy became the dominant form of mainstream entertainment. Without it, we wouldn't have Twilight, we wouldn't have Hunger Games, we wouldn't have the Narnia Chronicles, we wouldn't have the failed attempt at the Gold Compass saga. Lord of the Rings made fantasy what it is today, and for that I have to respect it. At number 3, it's Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth. This is my art house entry, so everyone out there that thinks that genre cinema is essentially an abhorrent notion that we should disregard, pay attention now. Pan's Labyrinth's a fantasy film. It's a fantasy film in every single stage of its creation. It's a film that asks us to enjoy the implausibility of the whole thing. And it does this through a very sophisticated engagement with political allegory, with absolutely wonderful aesthetics, and of course with a sense of sort of monstrousness and a history of Gothic literature. I'm a huge fan of the Hellboy films, but what Guillermo did with Pan's Labyrinth is make fantasy beyond the visceral and into the intellectual. And for that I must thank him. His film taps into a tradition of fantasy films such as Spirit of the Beehive, or A Kid for Two Farthings, the Carol Reed British East End movie. But what it does is propel it into the monstrosity of the mainstream. At number 2, it's The Neverending Story. After Wolfgang Petersen made Das Boot and was critically acclaimed for doing so, he decided to follow up his 3.5-hour, what I frankly think is a masochistic movie to put yourself through, with a joyful celebration of magic and myth. This film displays an almost Sartrean approach to ontology. It suggests that we are not just people that live and breathe and die, but people that dream and hope and be. It suggests that we are beyond what we think we might be, that the world is not suggested by what we are, but what we might be.
Sorry, Alex. Sorry to interrupt you. I had a scene here from Neverending Story. This is actually the second time I've uploaded this installment of Mondo Cinemark. I had a scene from Neverending Story to illustrate what Alex was talking about. Unfortunately, Warner Brothers shit themselves over the head of it. Well, actually, I see what they mean. I mean, the thought that the 12 people who might ever see this fucking thing might see 4 seconds of Neverending Story without paying for it. It brings me out in hives, right? I can't eat right when I think about it. So fair enough. I took the scene out. But thankfully, I was walking past Pinewood Studios earlier, and I stopped in for a minute and I said, "Look, I've had to take this scene from Neverending Story out of the new Mondo Cinemark thing. Did you mind if I shoot a sort of recreation that keeps me on the right side of the copyright law?" Fair enough, says they. Come on in and do it, for fuck's sake. We were doing fuck all. So I did that. So I'll present that here then instead. Hopefully it's a decent representation of what I had here before Warner Brothers shit themselves. Jesus, this story's been going on for some time, hasn't it? Hey. Does it ever end, the bloody thing? No. It never fucking ends.
So at number 1, it's The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz is quite possibly the greatest fantasy film ever made. People will tell you it's a musical. It is not. It is a film with music that emphasises fantasy at every single frame. People will tell you it's also a film about home and how there's no place like home. If there's no place like home, how fucking amazing is Oz? It's a paradoxical, complicated, awkward, antagonistic movie that suggests that actually beyond the picket fence is a world of wonder, colour, and Munchkins. And it never bothers to resolve that issue. It never bothers to offer us a world in which our desires are satisfied, but it takes us over the rainbow to a world apart from our own. A world where Kansas is black and grey, but Oz is technicolor and glorious. And it's in that discrepancy that the film lives. The Wizard of Oz is the greatest fantasy movie of all time, and it's not a musical. No, it isn't.
It's the fantasies you're talking about, is it? Eh? Well, no. Did you ever see a fantasy about these four Irish boys? These four Irish boys, and sure they had a loaf of bread in the floor atween them, and Jesus, the four of them are coming the bit out of the tap of this here loaf of bread. Oh, for Jesus Christ's sake, it was some sight to see. And they're coming out of this loaf of bread, and of course at the hinner end, one of them takes this loaf of bread here, and by Jesus, if he hasn't took it, and he hasn't fucking run a load of butter out of the top of it, and he's got it in his mouth, and he's chewing like a fucking hare, chewing the whole thing into his belly. Now, the smile on that boy's face, you couldn't replicate by painting or pixel. The smile on that boy's face when he had that handful of loaf with the cum and the butter on it thick as your arm. Oh, for Jesus' sake, that was some fantasy, boys. Oh, the fantasy was 90 in that film about the four Irish boys coming the bed out. A loaf of bread.
Is that it over now, would you say? Nope. Oh wait, aye, that's it now.